Let's have some revision first. CSS is composed of a set of rules, and each rule would have three components: the selector, the property, and the value. And the property and the value is combined as a declaration, and each selector may have a declaration block. Now again, we'd like to look into more details about the selectors for the elements. In this example, we have three declarations, three rules. HTML element is defined with the color block value. H1 is with the color gray, and H2 is with the color silver. At the end, we have all the display shown on the screen. Now remember the declarations and the keywords. Some examples are not valid. So bring size 2 cm, color ultraviolet cannot be used. The below ones would be the proper ones. Now here we start to learn more about the selectors. One example is I want to specify all colors in my display as red. Now we have a rule such as star color colon red. The star means that is everything, all elements. And here we say this is a universal selector. Now very often we may have the properties and the values the same for a number of elements. How we can combine them, how we can group them. CSS provides a way for us to group the same specification for different types of elements. Here one example here. Body, table, th, td, h1, and the rest. They're all separated by commas, and they share the same declaration block. And the color is specified in gray for these elements. Now, to look into another example, here we have different rules. H1, H2, all are specifying the color as purple, so H1 to H6. Now, to simplify or to group the selectors, we can introduce the use of commas. H1, comma, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. Now, here we can see more examples of specifying the grouping of the selectors. Now, with H1, H2, H3, H4, and B elements are defined with different declaration blocks. We can take a closer look. H1 and H4 are sharing the same set of declarations. So we combine them. So we can see that we have H1, comma, H4. At the same time, we notice H2 and H3, the background, they are having the same value. So we can rewrite H2 and H3 with the attribute background, the value is gray. So we can further simplify our work and grouping the different selectors here. Now, besides grouping selectors, we can group declarations also. Now, in this example, we have three CSS rules. H1, controlling the font, also the color, as well as the background. Three different rules. Now, we can combine them and group them all together for creating a declaration block. One approach is here the second point. H1 controlling the font, color, and background all together within the same brackets. Now, because sometimes we have the length problem, we may want to introduce another way to declare our H1 as a group. So the second way is every declaration becomes a separate line. Now remember, we cannot break the property value as the third example here, because introducing a new line for the third one, background aqua, does not work. So remember, only the first two works. In order to have a better control of the selectors, we like to illustrate and introduce you a concept of class. Now notice that at the time when we specify a CSS rule, again, we do have a selector. And a selector can be further specified by introducing the class selection or the class name. So we see some examples below. Take a look at the source code of HTML here. With the P element, we like to introduce an attribute, say class, and the value of the class is warning. And that can be used by the CSS file. So in this example, I have P class equal to warning, as well as in the second line, we have the span class, the span element, we have class equal to warning also. Now say I would like to have a display with the font weight equal to bold for anything I defined with class equal to warning. There are two ways to specify that. First is star.warning. And star means everything, a wildcard to represent all selectors with the class equal to warning. Now, in order to cut short, we can remove the star also. We can say dot warning and specify the font weight equal to bold. Now, if we only want to have the P element with class equal to warning, with the font weight equal to bold, then we can specify the CSS rule as what we see on the display here. Here we can see P dot warning, and then font weight is equal to bold, and the result will be displayed in the browser, look like what we're seeing here. If you want to have a better control of the warning class, you can individually specifying what selector or which element that you want to have a different display. Here we have one example. P.warning is for the P element with the warning class, and that has a font weight specification as bold. On the other hand, the same class, warning class, for a different element, span, can be defined with the display in italic. So the way is span.warning. So even though we have the same class, then for different elements, we should have different results. Now we've learned a way to further specify the selectors by introducing the class attribute. Here we have another type of control with the ID selector. We can use the element and specify the ID to select a certain type of elements. So the basic construct of the rule is what we are seeing here. Now here we see one example. With the P element, we can specify an ID attribute, and the name and the value of the ID is lead para. Now, for this element with the ID attribute, one can use the rule specifying in the CSS file as we see below. So we can see that star palm lead para. What does it mean? It means that all elements, this is true and applicable. At the same time, if these elements are having a name called lead para, and the associating CSS rule will be applied. So far we have ID, which is using the name. Okay, we have the class, which help us to further specify our selectors. The third one is using the attribute selector. So for an element which has the associated attributes, then the rules will be applied in CSS. And the construct is like what we're seeing here. Well, here we have one example of how attribute selector can be used. We have 3 hyperlink elements, A elements. The first 2 lines, we have the href attributes. And the third line, we have the title attribute. Okay. Take a look at the CSS correspondence. We have star, title. We have A, href title. We have A title equal to not a link. These define 3 separate rules. Star title means that for all elements with the title attribute, then the displaying rule will be applied. Here we can look at the source code in the HTML file. Obviously, the first rule is applicable to the third line. Again, we look at a second CSS rule in the screen. A href title. It means the hyperlink element, the A element, at the time it has the href attribute as well as the title attributes, then the rule will be applied. For this particular rule, when we look back the source file of HTML, we can only find the first line is applicable. So W3C will be highlighted in bold. Take a look at the third rule here. A title, not a link. So at the time that the A element having attribute title with a value, not a link, then this rule will be applicable. Then this rule will be applied to the third lines of the source file.